Hello, it's DNN Dave here, and I am coming to you with a follow-up from earlier today where we did a simple edit on DNNDocs.com using only our browser. So we didn't have to learn a bunch of Git or GitHub advanced features, setting up local environment, and all that. We were able to do everything through the browser. So hopefully that was helpful to you, but I wanted to do a follow-up and do some similar type edits, but in a local environment. We won't go through all the details on how to set up your local environment yet. Hopefully I'll be able to do another stream later on that. But today we're just going to do an edit on an environment that we already have set up. And I'll try to explain some of the basics of setup, but we won't go into great detail there. So let's jump right into it. Let me switch over to my screen here. And earlier we were dealing with adding the 9.6.1 release to the releases page under reference releases. And that worked out really well. As you can see, it's already live on the website. That happened about 6 or 7 minutes after I merged the pull request earlier for that. But one of the things that I've had on my to-do list for quite some time is to go back through the releases here. And what you'll notice is all of these, the links are going to the proper release on GitHub for the DNN platform repo under DNN software. However, once you get past 8.0.4, and if you'll look in the bottom left-hand corner of the browser, you'll see that the URL is correct there. However, if I go down to 8.0.3 and the ones that are before that, all of those go to old release note files from the old documentation center website that this was initially inherited from. So we need to go back and correct those 3 links there for the earlier 8 version releases. But the ones before that were not really on GitHub yet, so we have nowhere to really link to for that in the same fashion anyway. So those were on Codeplex. That was prior to DNN platform shifting from Codeplex to GitHub as a repository to share the code. So these here are going to link to archive repos that were set up a while back, a few years ago, to just have those archive releases there. So since we're going to be doing a few edits here, we could do this in the browser, but I wanted to just show the process for doing that local here instead of doing it on the browser in GitHub. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to flip over to a terminal window, and I have set up a local instance of the GitHub repo here, and I'll just do a list here to show the files. This is identical to what you see out on GitHub in the repo. So I'll go over to the DNN Docs repo out here. Let me see if I can open up the right window here. All right, so we are on the DNN Docs repo in the DNN community org on GitHub. So the files that you're seeing here are equivalent to the files that we're seeing here. And if you are setting this up in a fresh folder, you would probably use a command something like git clone, and then you would grab the URL under this clone or download, and you could copy that into your clipboard and then paste it in. If you wanted it to go into the directory that you're in at the time, you would just add a dot to the end of it. Or if you wanted it to create a subdirectory there, then you would leave the dot off. Now, I've already done that, but I want to make sure that I have the latest and greatest of the code that's out there. So what I want to do is, and I'm going to be doing this albeit via the command line here until we get into Visual Studio Code to actually edit the files. But I'm going to use a Git command called Git Status just to see that I only have a master branch here and that I am on that branch. Anytime that we make edits to the files, we want to make sure that we are on a branch other than master so that we can push those to our forked repo on GitHub instead of messing with master there. We want master to always be reflective of what is on master out on GitHub in the Upstream repository. And by Upstream, I mean this repository here, DNN Community, DNN Docs. Okay, so let me flip back over. So I'm going to run another Git command here called git branch just to list all of the local branches that I have. And it looks like I only have one branch, and that's master, so that's good. I want to make sure that I keep my local branches clean unless I'm working on something. I want to go ahead and delete those branches when I get done with those. And we'll show you later how to delete that branch after we make a pull request here. So we've checked to make sure we have a clean working environment, but we have not gotten the latest from the Upstream repository. So let's first look and see what remotes we have configured here. Now I've already configured these remotes, but there's a command that you can run, git remote and then -v for verbose. And that will tell me all of the remotes that I have configured. As you will see here, I've got my origin repo, and this is really just an alias, a short name, if you will, for this long URL. I've got my origin set up for github.com/david-poindexter/dnndocs.git, and that's set up to be able to do fetches and pushes. And then I've got an Upstream repo configured to point to the DNN community organization, the DNN Docs repo in that DNN community organization on GitHub. So that's typically how you're going to want to set this up and have it going for you. So what I want to do here now is I want to pull the latest code from our Upstream repo. So git pull Upstream, and then we want to name the branch that we want to get. Now we're in master right now. That's where our status is. We're on branch master. So we want to pull the Upstream master and make sure that that's merged in with our local copy. That way we know we have the latest and greatest of the code to be starting working with. So let me hit enter, and you'll see there's been a lot of updates since the last time I have worked locally with DNN Docs. So that's great. This is just a status of all the files that and the changes that have been made since the last time. So it's great. It's good to see this activity out on GitHub there. So now I am up to date locally with my local repo, but my forked repo on GitHub, and this is where a lot of people get in a bit of a little bit of a mystery. You really have three repositories that you're working with. You're working with your Upstream, and your origin is on GitHub, but it's your own fork of the Upstream repository. And then we have our local Git repository. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that my my origin, which is my forked repo, is up to date as well. So now that I have pulled the Upstream master into here and my local is in sync, I can make sure that my forked version is also in sync. And let me just show this to you real quick. If I were to go over to, let's go to github.com and let me replace, oops, my apologies here. Let me get to this, and let's replace DNN community with David-Poindexter, which is my forked repo, and I hit enter. Let's go over here. You'll see that it is not up to date with DNN Community Master, and we know this from this line here. And by the way, don't be thrown off by my dark theme here. This is a plugin in my browser. If you want to know what that is, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll be happy to share with you that I'm becoming a fan of dark sites and so forth. So it does a really good job with that. But anyways, this line here says the branch is 7 commits behind DNN Community Master. So that is the DNN Community version of the DNN Docs repo, the master branch. So in order to get this into sync, there's a couple ways to do that, but the cleanest way is to do that via command line. So I've gotten in the habit of every time I do a git pull Upstream master, I will also do a git push origin master. So this is going to send what I have locally, which is in sync with the Upstream, it's going to send that and commit that to my master branch on my origin repo, which is my forked repo. Okay. Hopefully that's clear to everybody. But once I push up here, we could switch back over to the browser and do a refresh here. And we'll see that now the branch is even with DNN Community Master. That's exactly what we want. That means we're in sync. So we now have the latest and greatest from the Upstream repo on both our fork and our local copy. So now we're ready to start working. Let me flip back over to the DNN Docs repo, the Upstream repo, and there are numerous issues that people have created out in the Issues tab. And if you wanted to be very thorough in your contributions, and especially if it was something a little bit more complex, you could come to the Issues tab and create a new issue, and then we could associate what's ultimately going to end up being our pull request that we make to this repo. We could associate that to that issue. Well, on the DNN Docs repo, we don't have a hard, fast rule on that. We like it when it is useful for either keeping track of different issues that you want to work with. Out there, you can certainly create issues and do it that way if it's helpful to you, or if it's helpful to the team in explaining exactly what you're wanting to do, especially if it's something you're not totally comfortable with. Well, in this particular update, I'm pretty comfortable that this is what we want to do. We've talked about it several times as a team, so it's just been on the punch list for quite some time and I haven't gotten around to it. So I'm not going to create an issue just to explain all of that again. We're going to just make the changes locally. We're going to do that on a branch locally. So let's do that first, okay? Let's go over into our command line again. And what I want to do is I want to create a copy of the master branch locally, but I want to make a copy of that into another branch so that I can work on it locally so that I'm not modifying master. We always want that to be kept in sync. So let's do this, git checkout, and then the -B option creates a new branch as a copy of the current one. And then I'm going to give it a name. So since I don't have an issue that I'm corresponding this to, like if I did, I would probably do something like issue dash whatever the number of the issue is on GitHub. However, I don't have that. So I'm going to call this something like releases update or something like that. Let me just make that a little bit shorter so that I don't have to type so much. I'll do rel update. All right. Let's go back and let's just do releases. All right, that sounds good. I'm going to hit enter now, and what that is going to do is it's going to switch us to that new branch called release-update, and that is an exact copy of master locally. So if I were to do a git status now, I would expect to see that we are on branch release update, and we are. So we've made no changes to it, so it's a clean environment. The tree is clean is what the terminology is here. So now we're ready to start modifying code. So let me use the short command to open up Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to do code space dot, and that will open up this working folder that I'm in within Visual Studio Code. So let's do that. Okay, so now we have Visual Studio Code open, and this is an exact copy for the most part of exactly what is on the GitHub repo. There are a few exceptions, so don't be thrown off by that. I've got a few extra folders from where I've done some development, and those files aren't checked into the repository on DNN Docs. So you can overlook those, and those are kind of grayed out here. So you'll see node modules, an OBJ directory, an underscore site, which is actually where the build of the site goes to, because we're using docfx to build the local copy of this if we want to preview it locally to make sure everything looks good. And then exported templates is where we're looking to see what kind of templates are available there in docfx. So you can excuse all of those. So what I've done here is under content, this is where all the main content lives that translates to pages in the end on the DNNDocs.com. So I'm going to go into content, and this file was under reference and releases. So I go to the index.md here, and this does look indeed like the content that we were seeing out there, but it is in Markdown. So that is something you'll want to become familiar with. If you want more information on that, you can go to the DNN Docs site and go to Get Started or Getting Started, and go to Contribution, and within Contribution you'll see DNN Docs or Contributing to DNN Docs, and there's some subs under this as well. In particular, Markdown Guide to DocFX is a good one to go through, and you can see what special syntax beyond just GitHub flavor Markdown. We're using DocFX, so it has its own flavor of Markdown, but most of what you're comfortable with in Markdown is already going to be there. It's just that it's extended, and there's some extra features in there built in just for documentation purposes. So that's all good. Let's go back over to Visual Studio Code. So now we're looking at the actual file, and we can see really quickly what the problem is here, because we've got, instead of full URLs for 8.3 and below, we have references to other files. We won't go into detail about how these xrefs works, but we want to modify this to point to the appropriate repos that are out there for this. So let's go back over to the browser here, and I've got a few tabs open just to make short of our time here. What I've done is I've gone all the way, let me scroll to the top here. I'm on the DNN software DNN.platform repo, and this is where the official releases are. And then from the code page, I clicked releases, and where it releases. Now there's quite a few pages of releases, so I went ahead and got to the page that's got the version 8 releases in here. So we'll scroll back to the bottom. And we want to make sure, now you'll actually see, if you keep going next here, you'll see some of the version 7 releases out here, but there are no assets associated with them. So there is no install files, symbols, upgrade, and any other assets that might have been part of that release. So we can only really go back to version 8.0.0. So we were only going to have 3 of them here that we're going to update to point to this official repo, and then we'll point the version 7 flavor of DNN releases to archive repos, and I'll cover that in just a minute. Okay, so let's start with the 8.0 release, and if I hover over this, I will see that it follows the same naming convention. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner of the browser, you'll see that the URL follows the same convention as all of the others. But I could just right-click on this and copy the link address. We'll go back over to Visual Studio Code, and we're going to replace the URL portion of this for the 8.0.0 release with what I put into the clipboard. So there's that. Now, I know the naming convention follows, but we'll just go through this to be a little bit more meticulous so we can see how it goes. So if I scroll up, the 8.0.1 release is here, so we can follow the same suit and copy link address, go over to the 8.0.1, and we're going to update that URL accordingly. And just for dexterity's sake, we'll continue to go to the 8.0.2, right click, copy link address, come back over to 8.0.2 URL, and we'll replace that. And lastly, we'll go to the 8.0.3 release, copy link address, come back over to the URL here, replace it with the actual full URL. So that's good. If I click save now, or Control S or Command S, I'm actually on a Mac here, so I can do that, then that saves the file. One of the things I wanted to point out here, let me go back over into my terminal window. And by the way, this you could use the terminal inside of Visual Studio Code, or you could use, if you're on Windows, you could use Command Prompt or PowerShell, as long as you have the Git for Windows tools installed, or the equivalent on Mac. So over here, if I did a Git Status now, since I just saved changes to that file, I would expect to see that that file has been modified, and indeed it has. So Git Status tells us that we're still on the right branch, and we have modified the file that we're looking to modify. So that's great. We're on the right track. Now, we could stop here and just go ahead and commit this and come back later and do the other ones, but I think we can get through these other ones fairly quick. We just have to go to a different place because those aren't on the official DNN.platform repo under the DNN software organization on GitHub. There are special repos set up for each major version of DNN, and I went ahead and went to just github.com/DNN software. And from here, if we were to go in the find repository field and start typing archive, then it's going to automatically filter these out. And you'll see that there's quite a bit of archive repos for every version all the way back to the beginning. So that is great. We're in particular looking at version 7. So let's go ahead and go into that repo. And we'll see that every release is in here. And let's see here. What we're going to do, now this is set up differently than the DNN.platform repo. There are no actual releases here. What these are is just archives of the release files. So any of the assets that were associated with that release are just in here as flat files. So for instance, if we were to look at 7.0.0, we could come in here, and what we'll see if we hover over these and you look down at the bottom left for the URL, there's the docs that were associated with it. There's the deploy package, and there's the install package and the source package. So what I'm thinking about doing is we will just link directly to this particular page, and then anybody that needs those files for any particular purpose. By the way, please upgrade your DNN websites. We don't recommend using these old versions of DNN for many, many reasons, including security being the #1 reason. But there are use cases where you need to have, like for instance, the upgrade package to get your older DNN site up to newer versions. There are some stepping stones in the upgrade path. So these are out here for archival purposes, just in case you have an odd situation and need some of these old packages. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to go back to the main page here for the 7.x repo, and we'll start with 7.0.0, and I'm just going to right click and copy this link address, and we're going to do the same thing all the way down from here. So we'll go to the 7.0 release, we'll paste that in there. And I think what we can do is we can start following the naming convention here, because it's not going to change through this. I know that those repos were set up really well. We just have to, if we're going to do it this way, we have to pay close attention and make sure that we change the appropriate characters in this. So I'm going to paste that same one in there, but this time, since this is the 7.0.2 release, I'm going to change the 1 to a 2. And then I'll highlight this. And this one is 7.0.3, so we'll change that to a 3. And so forth. Let's change this one to a 4. And I'll do this all the way through the 7.0.x ones, and then we will change it for the 7.1.x ones. Okay, so this is 7.0.6, and then here we need to make sure, don't get going too fast here because you might make a mistake. So it's good to double check yourself through this. So 7.1.0, and we follow the naming convention of a 2-character for each major, minor, and release. All right, and it might be easier here to just copy it over again and so forth, but I'm going to stick with this kind of model here because it's kind of in my brain at this point. Oops, and I did something crazy, so I'll do an undo. We'll paste that again. Okay, and this is 7.0.2. I'll scroll just to make sure. Yep, we're looking real good. Nope, I didn't change the 1. See how easy it is to make a mistake. So I'll come up here. This is 7.2.0 I'm looking at on the left there. So 7.02.00. and so forth. So this will take us just a few minutes just to get through this, but then this will all be up to date the way that it should be out there, and we can kind of mark this one off of our list, and you will see how it is to do this locally. I could have probably done this a little bit quicker by having it pre-done, but I thought it might be helpful to just see all of the steps that go into this and how you can kind of get yourself in trouble every once in a while with things and catch it. So let's see here, 3.0.1. I think we're looking good here. And I'll go back through and scan through these again just to make sure once I get done and before I actually commit it. So this is 7.3.3 and we'll go with 3.4. Oops, see how easy I finger flubbed that. And we're almost done. 7.4.0. And even though I'm being quite meticulous here and going through it like this, you know, I still want to run this locally just to make sure that these links work. And that way you'll actually see how you can build this locally as well. So I'm just scanning down through this, and I'm going to go backwards. 7.4.2, I would expect .1, .0, yep, 7.3.4, .3, .2, .1, .0, yep, 2.2, 2.1, 2.0, yep, 1.2, 1.1, 1.0, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. So that is looking pretty good. I'm going to save this file. And at this point, I think I'm done with the changes that I wanted to make, and I'm ready to run this locally. So let's go back over to the DNN Docs repo. We'll go to the home of this. And if we scroll down, we'll see how we actually run. Now, I've already installed docfx on my Mac here. So I ran this brew install docfx. But if we scroll on down, I've obviously cloned the repo and we have added our upstream. Keep on going, and we've cloned. Now this is one piece that you don't have to do, just so you know. You don't have to pull the entire DNN platform repo into here when you're just making these content page changes like this. Now, if you were working with the reference section of DNN Docs, and that's over in this area, reference. Now we are in reference, but in particular reference API. All of this documentation is actually built from that code being local in your environment. So if you're making any extension changes to any of the API documentation, then you would want to have that locally. But you don't have to have that locally here to do just basic content changes. So I'm going to leave that out. And that also cuts down on your build time locally here. And let's see. Going back over to this. Okay. So lastly, we've got all this done and we're down to this point. This is the command that we're going to run locally, docfx space -- serve. And that should install it locally or build it locally with our changes intact. So I'll just make sure that I've got that saved. I will switch over to my terminal window. Okay. And here I should be able to type docfx space -- serve. And this will take just a minute to build, but knock on wood, hopefully if everything goes well, we won't run into any issues with my local environment here. Every once in a while there are those local issues and we'll have to work through those, but it's looking pretty good so far. There's a few warnings here and there, but those are very typical warnings that you're going to have. Usually if it gets to this step, it's looking pretty good. Looks like there's an issue with another page that didn't have some valid markup in it. So it's going to catch some of those, but those are just warnings, so it's not a huge deal for our local environment. Yeah, once we get to this part where it's xref map exported, yeah, you're getting really close to the end. Okay, so now at this point, it tells us that it has built and it is serving up the underscore site folder, which is over here. Like I mentioned earlier, that's not something that's checked into the repo. That's the output of the static site that's generated from docfx. But it is now running on HTTP localhost 8080 port. So I'm going to copy that into my clipboard, and we'll go into the browser and we'll paste that in and hit enter. And this should be a local copy of the DNN Docs repo. And there's going to be a few things that don't work just right. And that's like these images for GitHub and stuff like that. Don't worry about that. You really want to just go to the area that you are working on. In this case, we were working under reference and releases. And there we go. So now I just want to do a spot check in here to make sure that these worked right. Now everything from 8.0.4 up was what I was expecting it to be. But let's check 8.0.3. Oh yeah, that's looking good. So if I were to click on that, that should take me to the proper repo on DNN Software Organization. Yep, and it does. It takes me exactly to the release that we're looking for. So that's fantastic. I'll hit the back button here. And then we'll just spot check some of these other ones. I won't click on every single one of them. Let's see. Yeah, these are looking good. So I'm hovering over the link and I'm checking in the bottom left-hand corner to make sure that the URL looks good. And all of these really do. So I'm going to check down into the version 7X series, and those look good too. But I'm going to click on one of these just to make sure. So that should go to 7.4.1, I believe is what I clicked. And the URL does look good up here, and that does take us right to all the files that they can then click on and download those files locally. So that is looking fantastic. We're really done at this point. So it's nice to be able to run it locally. Of course, you do have to have your environment all set up. You have to have docfx installed and so forth, but it's not that difficult once you get everything up and running. So what I can do is I can flip back over to my terminal window here, and this is still running in the background. It's serving up the site. So I'm just going to kill that by doing Control C, and that brings me back to here. Now, I've got my one file changed and it's saved. And if I do a Git Status, it should still show that that file has been modified. And that's all that I should see here. So I think we're ready to now push this branch to our forked repo, which would be the origin repo on GitHub. So how do we do that? We should be able to first add this file to our staged files. So this file's been modified, but it says here that changes not staged for commit. So we need to run the git add command to add this file there. Now, since this is the only file listed, and it is indeed one of the files that I want to include in this pull request, I want to just use the git space add space dot, and that will add any file that's listed in here. If you had accidentally modified another file, or if it's tracking some file that you really just didn't want to include in here, then you would have to add the files that are relevant one by one here. Or you could use some more advanced tools like Git Lens, which is an extension in Visual Studio Code, to help you stage those files using a more UI-driven way of doing it rather than command line. But I'm going to stick to the command line here and just add all files that are ready to be staged for the commit. So I'll do that. Now, if I ran Git Status again, now it shows that this has been modified and it's also ready to be committed. So now that we have staged that file, we're ready to commit it. So the way that we do a commit is git space commit, and then the -m option is for message. Every commit needs to have a message in it. So this something along the lines of updated all links for releases for 8.0.3 and prior. Or I should be more explicit. I should say something along the lines for 7.0.0 to 8.3. And that sounds good. Now, while I'm here, I know I'm going to use this message a little bit later, so I'm going to go ahead and just highlight this, and I'm going to right-click on it and copy that into my clipboard, because I'm going to use that again here in just a minute. All right, so I'm ready to commit that. Now, that's committing it locally, right? It's to our Git repo locally here on this computer. So I'll hit enter. And now we're ready to go. If we ran Git Status again, we shouldn't see anything in there. Nothing else to commit. We've already committed it locally. Now you can do multiple commits locally. So if I wanted to do all the 8.x changes first, and I could commit them just to kind of put a stake in the ground, you know, a snapshot, if you will, I could have done that. And then I could have done another commit for the 7.x releases and so forth. So it really just depends on how you want to flow with this. There's no problem with there being multiple commits with it, as long as it's clean and it includes only the files that you want to change in those. So now I am ready to push it up to my origin repo, which is my personal GitHub account, the forked version of DNN Docs from the main one. So let's do that. Git push origin, and then I'm going to give it the name of the branch that I've used here. So that way it matches. Release-update. So git push to origin this branch called release-update. So I'm going to do that. All right, and it looks like it is done. No errors or anything. And it's telling me that I could go ahead and create a pull request by going to this URL directly, which I could do that. Some people like doing it that way. I like doing it right from the browser in this case. So let's go and see what actually happened, because it seems a little bit smoke and mirrors, doesn't it? So I'm going to go to my repo. Oh man, look at that. I didn't even have to refresh the page, and I'm already seeing that this new branch is up there. That's fantastic. And if I were to drop down this list, oh yeah, there it is. I could actually switch over to it. Like in this case, I'll go to release, update, and I could drill down into the actual file and see the changes right there. We won't take the time to do all that. It looks like my connection's a little bit slow here with the streaming, so I won't do all that, but we could do that and see that it indeed reflects the same version of the file that we just had locally. So instead, I could either, right here within my own fork repo, I could click this. It's telling me I've got recent pushed branches up here that I could then compare and create a pull request right here. Now I could also go to the DNN Docs repo, and guess what? It's there as well, but it looks a little bit different, right? It lets me know that the David-Poindexter repo and the branch that's on that repo has a pushed branch. So really either place is fine. You can do it here or another, and the result will be the exact same. So we'll just do it here. I'll click this green button to do compare and pull request. So this is going to take that branch and actually generate a pull request that is, if you'll look here, this is sometimes a little bit confusing to look at, but the base repository is the Upstream, so DNN community/DNN Docs, and it is the master branch that we're comparing it to. But we're saying take it from the head repository, which is my origin, right? That my fork of DNN Docs, so David-Poindexter/DNN Docs, and the release-update branch. And my apologies that my camera just went out. The battery just died, but I don't want to end this live stream. Well, let's go ahead and finish this out, and I'll just be off camera. You don't need to see my ugly mug anyway. So this is looking really good. I don't see any changes that we need to do this, but like I showed in the last one, the process is really the same from here on out, but I want to make sure that this pull request has only the files and the changes at which I intended to make to this. So let's just do one more sanity check by scrolling down, and let's look. Okay, it looks like content/reference/releases/indexmd. Yep, that is the right file, and indeed 8.0.3 all the way down to 7.0 is shown changed. And I was mentioning before in the last live stream that by default you'll see the unified version of this view. I like to change that to split and let that be my default so that I can see the old file on the left and the new file on the right, and the color coding to indicate the changes to that file. That way I can do a really quick comparison. Oh, okay, it used to be this over on the left, now it is this on the right. So that is looking really good. And I see no other files that have been changed, so we are nice and clean. There's been no mistakes. If you were to see a lot of other files in this, chances are you missed a step that we went through there. So you want to make sure that you are always pulling the latest into your master, checking out from there so it makes a copy of the master into a local branch, and then pushing that branch to your forked repo, and then submitting a pull request from the Upstream repo to your fork so that it can pull in your changes from there. So that's really the flow of this. So this is all looking really good. I don't think I need to do another comment, so to make it more clear of what we're doing. So I will just paste that description in here, and I will create a pull request. So now our pull request is made. That wasn't so bad, right? Yeah, there's some Git commands that you're going to have to learn, but that process is the same every single time that I do this. Every once in a while, I'll get myself into trouble. I'll get in a hurry and I'll skip a step or do something slightly different and realize, oh, I just need to start over. So there are some additional tricks that you may find yourself having to do, but this is a good way to get started. And as also mentioned in the last live stream, once this is merged, now you're not going to see this unless you have elevated privileges on the DNN Docs repo out here. But since I am on the DNN Docs team, I'm seeing this button. Once this is merged by someone on the DNN Docs team, and in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do this since this is something we have talked about and we're good. I don't need anybody else to really review this. I'm going to go ahead and do this so that you can see exactly what you'll see once it is merged by a DNN Docs team member. So we will squash and merge as we do. And at this point, you'll see that the pull request has been successfully merged. And this is exactly what you're going to see, by the way. You're all set. The David-Poindexter GitHub account release-update branch can be safely deleted. And I do want to delete that branch off of my forked repo just to keep it clean. I don't want a bunch of rogue branches out there. Especially on something that's already been accepted and merged into the DNN Docs. Let's go ahead and delete it. And then also, just to keep things clean, I want to also delete that branch on my local machine. So let's flip back over into the terminal window. And by the way, in Visual Studio Code, you'll see which branch it's on down here. So that's kind of good too. It helps you know where you're at. So let's see, I want to now get rid of the branch that I'm currently on. So if I do Git Status, I'll see that I am still on that branch that we just committed and pushed up to our forked repo and made a pull request against. So I want to get off of this branch. I want to go back to the master branch as my working branch right now. So all I have to do is do git space checkout and do master, okay? Now notice it just switched in the background over here, and if I come back to here, yep, this is on master now, so this is the old version. Now you may be saying, well, why is it the old file? Well, that's because our local copy of master is not up to date now because we just merged a pull request out there. So changes can happen quickly out there. So in order to get that version here locally, I like to do this after I do this. I'll do it before I start working on my changes and then after it is merged as well. So I'll do git pull upstream so we can get the latest copy from there from master branch on the upstream. So if I pull that in, you see it change in the back. See, that is actually already on the upstream repo. So now we're in sync locally, but we're not in sync on our forked repo. So we can just do the same steps we did at the beginning of all this and do git push origin master, and that will sync my master branch on my forked version with this. So I like to always keep these up to sync. Not 100% necessary, but it's good to at least get yourself in the practice of making sure that your local copy is up to date so that when you do a checkout and create a branch from it, that you're working off of the most recent copy of everything. Now, back full circle, we need to clean up our branch. So if I were to list all the branches that I have here locally by doing git branch, we see that we have 2 branches here, and I don't need this release-update branch anymore. So I am going to delete it. The way that I do that is git branch, but this time I'm going to do -D for delete, and then I'm going to name the branch release-update. Hitting return will actually delete that branch, and now if I ran git branch again, I only have master and we're up to date. So all is well there. Right now on the repo out here of DNN Docs on the Upstream, the continuous integration, continuous deployment background process is running to build the site and deploy it live to DNNDocs.com. So if we were to wait here, I don't know, 6-7 minutes or so, then this change that I made would already be live on the DNN Docs website. So you can get excited when somebody accepts your pull request and merges it in, that it's going to be live on the site, you know, barring no issues. It'll be live there very quickly. So this is great. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been helpful to you. This is a little bit longer segment because there's a little bit more involved in it. But if you like this content, be sure to click the subscribe button below and tell all your DNN friends about this. Let me know also in the comments if there are other sessions you would like me to do, or to help you with specific things that you're looking at doing with DNN Docs, or really anything related to DNN. So thanks. Hope you have a great day. Take care.